I remember Fairview, Pennsylvania, mostly in shades of gray. Not because it was a sad place, but because that's how everything felt under my father's watchful eye. My name is Audrey Miller, and when I was 17, I mostly lived inside my own head, building castles out of textbooks and dreams of a life far away from our quiet ranch house on Maplewood Drive. I was a studious girl, always with a book in my hand, sketching ideas for a small business I hoped to start one day. My goal was simple: to study business in college, to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet and build something that was mine, truly mine. It wasn't about running wild or rebelling in the way most teenagers might. It was about independence, about a future where my choices were my own. But in my father's world, Anthony Miller, that kind of ambition, especially for a girl, was seen as pure defiance. He ruled our home with an iron fist. His word was law, and any questioning of it was met with cold disapproval. I loved my mother, who tried to soften his edges, but even she walked on eggshells around him. I spent months applying to colleges in secret, using the public library computer after school, saving my progress on a flash drive, and diligently clearing the browser history each time, feeling like I was committing some grave crime. It felt like I was leading a double life, one where I was the dutiful daughter and another where I was carving out my own path. I tried to be careful, to be invisible, to keep my dreams tucked away where he couldn't see them. But secrets in our house were like whispers in a silent room. They always found a way to echo. The day he found my acceptance letter from Penn State tucked inside my geometry textbook, the quiet tension in our house snapped. I remember the sharp glint in his eyes, not of anger, but of something far colder and more terrifying: absolute conviction. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't yell, he didn't even demand an explanation. He just walked into my room with a large, black trash bag, the kind we use for lawn clippings, and started systematically taking my life apart. My worn denim jeans, the ones with the paint splatters from art class, were shoved in first. Then my stack of paperback novels, each one a window to another world, quickly followed. My sketchbooks, filled with designs for dresses and logos for imaginary companies, crumpled as he tossed them in. And then, the worst of it, my grandmother's quilt. It was the only tangible thing I had left of her, stitched by her own hands over 3 long winters while she battled cancer. It still carried the faint scent of lavender, a smell that always brought me comfort, a reminder of unconditional love and safety. He snatched it from my bed without a second thought. I stood there, frozen, my chest tightening with each item that disappeared into the bag, watching my memories and my future vanish. He didn't stop until my room was bare, stripped of everything that made it mine. Then he carried the heavy bag outside, into the meticulously manicured backyard, towards the old burn barrel we used for yard waste. I followed, numb, my bare feet cold on the grass. I watched, horrified, as he doused the contents with lighter fluid, the chemical smell mixing with the fresh scent of cut grass. With a sickening whoosh, everything I owned went up in flames, curling into smoke that carried my hopes and dreams away into the clear afternoon sky. He stood there holding a garden hose in his other hand, not to put out the fire, but to ensure the flames didn't scorch a single blade of his precious lawn. "This is what happens when you disobey me, Audrey," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, as he watched my life turn to ash. I was 17, too stunned, too heartbroken to speak. I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, feeling the heat of the fire on my cheeks and the cold emptiness in my soul. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, my mother crept into my room. Her hands were trembling as she pressed a thick white envelope into mine. Inside were my birth certificate, my social security card, and $500 she had secretly saved, dollar by dollar, from her grocery money. "Go, Audrey," she whispered, her eyes pleading with mine. "Don't come back." Without another word, I climbed out my bedroom window, leaving behind the smoke-filled memories and the ghost of a childhood that was never truly mine. I ended up at a youth shelter across town, a stark concrete building with narrow hallways and a smell of disinfectant that never quite faded. My new home was a steel frame bunk bed with a thin vinyl mattress in a room I shared with 3 other girls, all with their own stories of why home wasn't an option. The first few weeks were a blur of fear and exhaustion. I felt utterly alone, navigating a world that suddenly seemed vast and unforgiving. I pushed myself, knowing there was no safety net, no one to catch me if I fell. I studied every spare moment, earning my general educational development diploma with a grim determination. Then I found a job working overnights behind bulletproof glass at a gas station, the kind of place where every customer interaction felt like a gamble. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale glow on the cheap cereal and instant coffee I bought to keep myself fed. I opened my first bank account with the money I earned, a small sum that was entirely mine, money no one could ever touch or take away from me. I ate ramen noodles, took buses that rumbled through the dark streets, and studied until my eyes burned, long after pride stopped mattering and sheer survival took over. I enrolled in community college the second I could afford it, stacking classes and work shifts until I thought my head would explode. It was a grind, a constant uphill battle against fatigue and the haunting memory of that burned barrel. Every time I felt like giving up, like the weight of it all was too much, I would close my eyes and see the flames, smell the smoke, and hear my father's chilling words. That image was a constant reminder, a cold fuel to my growing fire. I was a young woman, barely 18, navigating a world that was supposed to be hostile, but it was nothing compared to the war zone of my own home. It was during those long nights, hunched over economics textbooks in the gas station's cramped break room, that I started to understand something my father never meant to teach me. The people who use money to control you are usually the same people who don't understand it nearly as well as they think they do. He used money as a weapon, a tool of power, but he fundamentally didn't grasp its true potential. That lesson, that revelation, changed everything for me. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about strategy. I started devouring every book I could find on finance, property law, and investment. I needed to understand the rules of the game if I was going to beat him at his own twisted version of it. My academic advisor, a kind woman named Ms. Evans, noticed my intense focus and steered me towards a part-time job in title services, working in a quiet office filled with the rustling of old paper and the hum of fluorescent lights. It wasn't glamorous. I spent hours poring over stacks of deeds, liens, property filings, and foreclosure notices. It was the kind of paperwork most people never look at twice, seeing it as boring and tedious. But I looked at all of it. I got good, really good at reading records, tracing complicated lines of debt, and spotting the hidden cracks in a property's foundation long before it was obvious to anyone else. I learned how fortunes were made and lost, how properties were acquired and foreclosed upon. It was like learning a secret language, a powerful code. Later, after graduating community college with honors, I got my real estate license, expanding my knowledge of the market and how transactions really worked. Later still, I started saving real money. Not just survival money, but the kind that sits in an account, growing quietly, waiting for you to become the person who knows exactly what to do with it. It was a slow, methodical accumulation, each dollar a tiny victory against the ghosts of my past. My life was still hard, still demanding, but I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, brick by painful brick, a fortress around myself and planning my offensive. There were moments late at night when the loneliness would creep in, when the weight of all the sacrifices would threaten to overwhelm me. I'd stare at my reflection in the dark window of my small apartment, a tired young woman with shadows under her eyes, and wonder if I was strong enough to see it through. But then I'd remember the quilt, the smell of lavender turning to smoke, and the cold, unfeeling stare of my father. That memory was a fire of its own, burning away any thoughts of giving up, hardening my resolve, and fueling my relentless pursuit of justice. And then, one ordinary afternoon, years after I had climbed out that window with nothing but a white envelope and a broken heart, I saw a familiar address on a foreclosure list that crossed my desk. It was typed in stark black ink, undeniable. 2714 Maplewood Drive, my childhood home. The same ranch house with the polished brass numbers by the front door that I had polished countless times as a chore. The same backyard where my father had burned my sketchbooks and my grandmother's precious quilt. The same house, the same ground he had valued more than my dreams. My breath hitched in my throat, a strange mix of shock and icy triumph. The numbers confirmed it. He had mortgaged it, refinanced it multiple times, leveraging it deeper and deeper into debt, all to fund what I knew was my brother's college education and fledgling business. For his son's dream, he poured out his resources, went deep into debt. For mine, he gave me fire. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, yet it also sharpened my focus. My father, the man who believed he understood money and control, had systematically driven himself into financial ruin, all while maintaining the outward appearance of success and power. It was the ultimate unspoken failure, a hidden crack in his own foundation. I ran the numbers 3 times, meticulously, coldly. The house was a solid structure on a good lot, even if it belonged to a stranger. It had potential value. The bad decisions attached to it, my father's decisions, wouldn't show up on an appraisal report. They only showed up in the auction rooms, on the faces of people like him who had mismanaged their assets. And now I was one of those people, but I was on the other side of the ledger, armed with knowledge and the very money he once denied me. The game was finally beginning, and I was ready to play. The courthouse in Fairview smelled of old paper, stale coffee, and floor wax, a comforting aroma to me now, a scent of official business and inevitable outcomes. Investors, mostly older men in rumpled suits, sat in folding chairs, their faces expectant, waiting for properties to come up for auction like they were waiting on weather reports. I kept my expression neutral, my pulse steady, as the auctioneer's voice droned through the list of foreclosed properties. My heart thumped a slow, heavy beat as he finally called out the address, 2714 Maplewood Drive. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I kept my paddle low, watching the room, observing the other bidders. I knew the value, I knew the hidden potential, and I knew what I was willing to pay. I waited patiently, letting the initial flurry of bids die down, allowing the room to thin out until only a few serious players remained. Then, when the bidding seemed to hesitate, I raised my paddle once, a single decisive movement. The room went silent for a beat. The auctioneer looked around, waiting for another counteroffer, but none came. He brought his gavel down with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. Sold, he announced, looking directly at me. Ma'am, please sign here. My hand didn't shake as I took the pen. There was no elation, no wild triumph, just a deep, quiet sense of inevitability, of something finally settling into its rightful place. 17 days later, I picked up the recorded deed from the county clerk's office. It was a simple piece of paper, but its weight felt monumental in my hands. Grantee Audrey Miller. I sat in my car, parked on a side street overlooking the courthouse, holding that paper. I thought about the 17-year-old girl who stood in that backyard with smoke in her hair and nothing left to pack. I thought about the fear, the anger, the determination that had carried me through all those long, lonely years. And then I drove. I drove to Maplewood Drive, to the neighborhood that had once felt so impossibly large and intimidating. It looked smaller now, quieter, as if the place itself had been waiting for someone else's story to catch up with it. The brass numbers by the front door, which I had polished with such care as a child, were dull and tarnished now. The concrete patio where I used to sit and read was cracked and overgrown with weeds, but the lawn, of course, was immaculately trimmed. My father, Anthony Miller, would let the walls crumble and the foundation crack before he'd allow the grass to grow long. That was his vanity, his unwavering focus on superficial appearances. He was out front when I pulled up, pushing the old mower in slow, straight lines across the vibrant green expanse of grass. The familiar whir of the engine was a sound from my distant past. He wore the same faded flannel shirt, his shoulders still rigidly set, his posture stiff with a stubborn pride. He was the same man, just older, smaller somehow, his movements a little slower. I turned off my engine, sat for a second, and watched him. He didn't notice me at first. He just kept walking behind that mower, his head slightly bowed, moving with the unquestioning certainty that this ground still belonged to him because he said it did, because it always had. Then, as he turned the corner of the house, his eyes drifted up, and he saw me. He stopped the mower. The sudden silence was jarring, absolute. He stared, his face a mask of confusion, then slowly a dawning realization, a flicker of something that looked like disbelief, then perhaps, finally, recognition. I opened my car door, the sound echoing in the stillness, and slowly, deliberately started walking toward the house, toward him, the recorded deed to his home tucked securely in my bag. I didn't say a word, didn't need to. The simple act of my presence, my confident stride on what was now my property, spoke volumes. I walked past the cracked patio, past the dull brass numbers, past the carefully tended rose bushes, straight across the lawn he had protected more carefully than he had ever protected me. When I reached him, I stopped just a few feet away. He still held the mower's handle, his knuckles white. His eyes, once so cold and controlling, now held a bewildered vacancy. I looked around at the house, at the perfect lawn, at the man who had burned my future to the ground. There was no anger left in me, no searing rage, just a quiet, profound sense of justice. He had taken everything, but in doing so, he had unwittingly given me the greatest lesson of all. I pulled the folded deed from my bag, the paper crisp and official, and held it out for him to see. He looked at it, then at me, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. "This house," I said, my voice calm, clear, and steady, "is no longer yours, Father, it's mine." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting him feel the full weight of them. "I'm not keeping it, though, I'm selling it. Every dollar will go towards building a new scholarship fund at the Fairview Community College, a fund for young women like I used to be, for those who dare to disobey expectations and build their own futures. It will be called the Audrey Miller Freedom Scholarship." The finality of my words hung in the air between us. His face crumbled just a fraction, a tiny break in his rigid composure. I saw a flash of fear, then understanding, and finally a deep, bitter defeat. He looked at the house, then at the deed, then back at me as if seeing me for the very first time. I turned and walked away, back to my car, leaving him standing there, alone on the manicured lawn he had valued above all else, the echo of his own words. "This is what happens when you disobey me," now ringing hollowly in his ears, a chilling prophecy of his own making.